be back, Larry?
Yep,
Okay.
definitely.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome. During the inauguration of the first Jewish president of the United States of America, Mrs. Goldstein, his proud mother, was sitting front row center. And one of the senators turns to his mom and says, Mrs. Goldstein, you must be so proud of your little boy, David. Look at how far he's come. And she sighs, says, yeah, but my other son, Jeffrey's a doctor. Every parent has something they wish for their children, certain aspirations they have, their hopes or dreams. My father has been in insurance for almost 40 years. And more than anything in the world, he would have loved one of his two sons to follow in his footsteps. When I was 8 years old, he gave me a business card that said, Les Light and Sons Insurance Services. My brother is now a photographer, and I'm a rabbi, but he's still proud of us. In the insurance business, my father told me that when they first had the idea of trying to sell policies, that when someone would pass away, there could be income for the family, they termed it death insurance, which makes sense. When somebody dies, this is insurance for that consequence. For some strange reason, they weren't selling too many policies. They realized if you change the name slightly from death insurance to life insurance, somehow that makes all the difference. And that's true in the insurance world, and I think that's true in our own world as well. When we hear the term death or passing on, passing away, however euphemistically you'd like to say it, it scares us. It's something that we'd rather not think about. It's something that I'd rather not attend a lecture discussing. But those of you who have came out tonight, welcome. And I think we're going to learn a lot. The educational value of tonight, gaining some knowledge, the importance of Jewish burial, what exactly are the options out there, what is cremation, why do we avoid cremation, and we have with us some top-notch speakers. Rabbi Jeffrey Kopelman is the head of the entire Chevra Kadisha of South Florida, and he'll be addressing us this evening, followed by Rabbi Jay Lyons, who's also intimately involved with the National Chevra Kadisha organization. It's a pleasure to have both of them with us. Without further ado, Rabbi Kopelman.
Thank you and welcome. There's a mic automatically here. Let me also start by a little levity, a little humor, or try to put this very serious topic, bring a little light to it, even though there's no joke. It's not a joking manner, but someone came to my office a couple weeks ago, and he told me that when he died, he wanted to be cremated and his ashes sprinkled at Bloomingdale's. I said to him, why would you want that? He said, this way I know my wife will visit me 3 times a week. That is a funny joke, but unfortunately, the epidemic of cremation is no joke. If you think about it, everyone here, I'm sure, can come up with a reason why people are choosing cremation. Is it the cost factor? Cost has a lot to do with it. But I've got to tell you that in 32 years that I'm involved in Chevra Kadisha, never has anybody called me up and said, we don't have money to pay for a burial. And the response has never been, well, I'm sorry, you're just going to have to cremate. We have found a way to provide a burial for their loved one. money is perhaps the easiest objection to all of this, because, thank God, we have a community that responds well to these types of things. All I have to do is get on the phone and start talking to our brothers and sisters out there and saying that a Jewish person is going to be cremated unless we come up with the funds to prevent it. And it's just a short matter of hours that things get done. So the average person out there, unfortunately, who can't perceive the value of spending $13,000 for a burial compared to anywhere from $500 to $4,000 for a cremation, there's no perceived value. Most of those people aren't willing to spend, what are we paying for kosher chickens nowadays? What are we, I don't know, my wife, I don't know, $4 a pound compared to $2 a pound for not kosher, for a treif chicken? There's no perceived value in that. So how can there be a perceived value by many in spending $13,000 compared to as little as $500 for a cremation? A lot of people put in their will they want to be cremated. But the information they're receiving to make that determination is erroneous information. Information that is never given to the public. It's like groups like this that can now hear what the information, what the truth is, and take some of that truth and give it over to others and stop them, prevent them from cremation. There are other problems. Jewish family goes into a Jewish funeral home. The Jewish funeral home is offering cremation. So obviously it must be kosher. It's offered by the Jewish funeral home, right? Unfortunately, most of the Jewish funeral homes do offer it. I'll tell you another big reason. Families in the funeral home, they're looking for a rabbi to perform the service for a cremation. Funeral director calls up, and I'm not indicting the conservative and reform world. I'm not, and that's not where I'm going with this. But unfortunately, they call a conservative reform rabbi. There's been a death. We want you to officiate. Families here, they don't know the family. And even if they do, they're not encouraging them to have a Jewish burial. But they're so willing, unfortunately, to go along with the cremation. After all, they're getting $500 to do the funeral. I guarantee you, if the rabbis would stop doing services, when the funeral home calls up and the rabbi says, I'm sorry, it's cremation, I can't do it, I won't do it, that'll help turn the tide. But as long as they can call up and get a rabbi to do the service, that's another reason why families are not so quick to change, especially in a pre-arrangement. Pre-arrangement, family makes a cremation. The family now believes that that is the wish of their loved one to be cremated. They don't look into the reasons why they possibly want to be cremated. I hear reasons like, well, my children will never come visit me in the cemetery. We don't have a ground burial for the reasons that people can come to the cemetery and visit the grave. That's not the primary reason why we have a ground burial. That is an additional benefit of having a ground burial. We say Moses, the greatest Jew that walked the earth, had a Jewish burial. God took care of Moses' burial arrangements, performed the tahara, and he had a ground burial. Yet we don't know where Moses was buried. So he never gained the benefit, nor did any of his ancestors gain the benefit of going to visit his grave, because we don't know where it is. A lot of people, I hear that's one excuse. No one's going to come visit. All of of these excuses, and that's what they are excuses. I've had, crazy as this may sound, people say to me, well, my mother and father died in Auschwitz, and they were cremated. So I'm going to be cremated too. And I'm crying, my heart and my soul saying, your parents had no choice. They are not going to be held accountable for that. But they're crying out now, please, please don't do that. We believe that the soul knows exactly what's going on when it departs from the body. It's hovering over the body, making sure that the body is taken care of in a proper Jewish, dignified manner. Most people don't realize that it takes about 3 hours for the average human body to burn in temperatures of about 2,000 degrees. The heart, the brain, they don't burn, they melt. They turn, and then the bones turn to phosphorus. When a person gets back an urn in a box about this size, they're getting 90% crushed bone, because they take the bones then, they put them in a grinder, and they grind them up. And so that's what a person's getting back, is 90% crushed bones. Now, most people, if they knew that process, they would say, don't you dare do that to my loved one. The Tropics section of the Miami Herald magazine about 20 years ago interviewed a non-Jewish owner of the largest crematorium here in South Florida. Not Jewish. He said he witnesses 4 or 5 of these a day. Takes about 2.5, 3 hours for each one. He said he will not be cremated. It had nothing to do with the connection of the soul and the body. He just made that decision based on a purely physical aspect of everything. Now put the element of the soul into this whole thing. There's a problem out there. How do we turn the tide? 40% of our people are choosing cremation in South Florida now. Again, one of the easiest objections when a family says to me, we have no problem. We want mom to have a Jewish burial. We just don't have the money. That's easy. How about a daughter calls me up, son calls me up and says, my mother wanted cremation, and my father is alive, and my father insists on doing my mother's will, and I can't possibly convince him to change. Those are the objections that are the most difficult objections. And even though those decisions were based on erroneous information and lies, outright lies, it's clean, it's swift, it's, you know, most of the time families say to me, and I've had families say to me, when they receive back the box, the urn, they say to me, I should have listened to you. We went somewhere else, we had the cremation done, and now I can only think of my husband reduced to ashes. Instead of the wonderful memories, I can only think of him reduced to ashes. There is now tremendous groups out there. Rabbi Zone in New York is the one really responsible for all of this. And trying to unite us all, trying to change what has really grabbed a hold of our people. This foreign concept. By the way, the environmentalists on this are on our side. The greenies, they're all on our side. It's horrible for the atmosphere, for the environment, cremation, horrible. They're on our side. They say the safest, best place to deposit the body when its use is finished in this world is in God's earth. They may not say the word God's earth, but in the earth. But the problems, I see it every day. There's not a day that goes by that I don't get a call from a family that says we're going to cremate. Some threatening me that unless I can find a way to make sure they have a Jewish burial, they're going to cremate. Now I could say the following. What do I care? Cremate. But I care. And I got to tell you, all of you, and it's heartwarming to know that our people care. How many times I've called up rabbis and said, listen, this person, you don't even know them, needs to be buried. They're all so willing to help raise the money, to write checks for their benevolent fund, to do whatever is needed. Our brothers and sisters that are out there are really concerned, and they really step up to the plate and help financially and emotionally. Well, I have to, you gotta be careful in certain things that I say. When a person has passed away, and they are cremated, and then 5 years later, the daughter calls me up and says, I've now become a little associated with traditional Judaism, and I now understand that it was a mistake to cremate Dad. Now I want to make sure Mom has a Jewish burial. You got to be very careful what you say to her siblings who have no connection to Judaism. All they know is that Dad was cremated, and Mom's desire is to do the same thing that Dad did. Now, how do you get to that family? How do you reach that? Certain things that you can get away with saying, such as, this is going to hit you right between the eyes, so watch out, I'm warning you now, that you can't say this, but you can say it to certain families in certain times, that why would you want to do what Hitler, Yamach Shemo, did to 6 million of our loved ones? But you can't say that to a family once they've already cremated. Especially to the non-religious people that are related. We had a situation where a woman, very interesting story, she played violin and her husband played piano during the war. They had not such a Jewish sounding last name, and believe it or not, they survived by doing concerts for the SS officers in the last few years of the war. And after one of their concerts, their last concert, one officer heard them speaking to each other in Yiddish. He took out a machete and he hacked her left arm off at the shoulder and his arm, his right arm at the shoulder. They were found by some Russian soldiers, taken to Russia. They spent the last few days of the war in a Russian hospital. After that, they moved to Israel. She trained herself to become a singer, and he played the piano, one hand. If you remember seeing them on the Tonight Show, not Tonight Show, on the Ed Sullivan Show, many, many times they were on the Ed Sullivan Show. I'm not going to mention names. She followed her husband's wishes when he died, and he was cremated. She was befriended by a real righteous woman in Miami Beach and told her, you can't do that to yourself, and convinced her to listen to me. I was going to write a pre-arrangement actually for her, and she said, I'm not up to it tonight, we'll do it next time you come. Okay, but at least we changed her mind. I called her right before, it was right before Sukkot, the holiday of Sukkot. She said, I'm going into the hospital for a small procedure. As soon as I get out, we're going to write a pre-arrangement for me. Well, unfortunately, she didn't come out of the hospital. She died in the hospital. And now myself and the woman that befriended her hired an attorney who really acted pro bono. He was great because his heart was in the right place. We were in court, there was a Jewish judge, there was a Jewish attorney representing what he thought was her wishes to be cremated because the last will she had written included cremation. We're in front of the judge. We thought we were like just completely shot down, dead in the water. And he said to me, how can I believe you? How can, this doesn't make any sense. The lawyer is here. He just wrote a will. And I said, Your Honor, there are many times families come to me after there's been a death. And the family, the person has said or has made prearrangements for a burial in New York. But they made the prearrangements 15 years ago. Now all of his family's living in Florida. And he no longer wants a burial in New York. And his family knows that. So we don't follow the prearrangement that was made 15 years ago. We do a new arrangement that includes a burial where the family knows that's where he would want to be. That's where they would want him to be. He said, we are his family. We heard this woman change her mind. In the last second, the judge ruled in our favor. And this woman had a kosher burial with a promise that I would take the cremains out of her apartment and put them in the casket. Now, the problem is that's not allowed. So I told the judge, Your Honor, I'm sorry, I can't do that. It's not allowed. He said, can you bury it in the plot next to hers? Well, traditionally that's not allowed either. So I said, I'll take care of the situation. So I buried it. There's a road here. I took care of it and buried the remains across the road. But she received a Jewish burial. But had we not gone to court, for sure, her attorney would have made sure that she had a cremation. And these types of stories just happen all the time. I can go on and on and on about stories, but what are we going to do about it? How can we make a difference? We can put together, as Rabbi Lyons will tell you, we can put together the purchase of a cemetery, but it's still going to cost money. Those people who will be paying for a burial, full price, will be paying for those who can't afford a burial. Everyone willing to do that? I am. But it's more than that. The system is broken. We have to find a way to fix not a broken system, but really put together a new system. Can you imagine family going to the funeral home, the worst day of their lives? They have no money. The funeral director says that'll be $13,000 to bury your loved one. And it happens all the time. They don't have access to people who really want to make sure there's a Jewish burial. And the funeral director says, we have an alternative for you. The alternative is for as little as $1,000. The Jewish funeral homes don't do it for $500, but as little as $1,000, we can have a cremation. And when families don't have money, and they don't know any better, and they don't know the difference, and nothing has ever been spoken in the house about the wishes, and how the parents said, listen, even though I don't have the money, most parents aren't going to do that, though. They're going to say, I don't have the money, so do whatever you have to do, unfortunately. And so they do whatever they have to do, and they cremate. It's brutal every day. 1, 2, 3 calls a day from families that just don't have the money. But again, that's the easy problem. And how about a woman who calls up and says, my grandmother is going to be cremated, and my grandfather says that's what she wanted. You know what I tell that woman, the daughter, the granddaughter? I say, speak from your heart. Tell your grandfather that it's going to break your heart. Not only are you hurting so much that your grandmother has just died, but tell your grandfather the truth, that your heart will be crushed if that's what you do. And quite often, I've seen grandparents who have the money. They don't want to spend it. They don't like to spend it, but it's just like giving charity. Nobody has ever suffered for giving charity. Somehow, some way, God finds a way to get it back to a person and more. And I can guarantee all of you that if all of you came to bat and helped families in situations to prevent an autopsy, you would never lose a dime. Never. God would bestow upon you so many blessings. I'm not here to raise money. I'm not here, and there's no appeal, so don't worry. I am appealing to you, though, that if you're ever asked to step up to the plate, and you can help save a Jewish person from being cremated, you'll never lose a dime. Not a dime. Well, the truth helps, but doesn't always do the trick. Doesn't always do the trick. I had a situation last week where a woman calls me up, a granddaughter. She was raised by her grandmother, and she knew that her grandmother wanted cremation. Her grandmother went out and bought a prearrangement 5 years ago. It included everything for cremation. Now I got a call from this woman's mother-in-law, who's a religious Jewish woman, who had no idea that her daughter-in-law's grandmother was going to be cremated. We tried, everybody tried. The husband tried, his parents tried, I tried. It just didn't work. We weren't able to get her on time, the granddaughter, to convince her. You know, the argument, if your grandmother was on a cliff and she asked you to push her off the cliff, that may have been her desire, her wish, but would you have done that? She said, of course not. I said, of course you wouldn't, because you know that that wouldn't be the best thing for her. And you know this isn't the best thing for her, but it's her wish, it's her desire. So many decisions are based upon that it was the will, desire of the deceased to be cremated. So we've got a huge epidemic. We've got to try so hard to change the minds, the hearts and minds. There are many lines that are used. Some work, some don't. Speak from your heart. If you have an opportunity and you know that this is the will of a person and the desire of a person to be cremated, talk to them. It certainly is heartwarming to know that our people are standing behind anybody that wants a Jewish burial. You would be amazed to see how many thousands of dollars have been spent on people that nobody even knows to stop cremations. 1, 2 phone calls, person just gets it. That's all you have to do is get involved. Don't be afraid to get involved. So I'm asking you from my heart to your heart. They say words from the heart enter into the heart. I'm hoping that my words from my heart have found their way into your hearts. We can make a difference. I truly believe that we need one rallying force to create achdus among our people, oneness, and that is cremation. If we can get the reform and conservative movements, and they're not in favor of cremation, but they gotta fight. They gotta fight harder. They gotta join forces with the traditional community. This could create achdus like we've never had before. Oneness. We go out together as one. To fight this, we can win. A lot of questions out there. I don't have many answers, but you can try. Who's got any questions for me? Yes.
Good why is it so important for a proper Jewish burial as opposed to cremation?
Okay, great question. I'm going to take first the easiest answer is because our Torah tells us that's the way we bury our loved ones, okay? That's really the easiest and best answer that I can come up with. Let's take it another step further. But because our soul hovers over our body and knows exactly what's being done, and the soul that lived in the body is so used to the body, only wants the best for the house, that the body that houses the soul, and wants what is right for that body, and is crying out, please, do what is right for my body. It's not a piece of meat to be discarded any way we see fit, but rather a holy vessel that once contained our soul. Unfortunately, in the back rooms of funeral homes, it's treated, unfortunately, like, to be nice, less than a holy vessel. I tell people all the time, people that want a Jewish burial, but when it comes time to making the decision on who should prepare their loved one for a burial, should it be the guy that's working in the back of the funeral home, or should it be the Hever Kadisha? The volunteer men and women, men prepare men, women prepare women, or use them to prepare the body. You have a choice. Someone is going to prepare your loved one for a burial. It's either going to be that guy in the back room or the volunteer men and women who treat a body with the love, the reverence, the concern, and the care that they would treat a body as if that person was alive. God forbid my father was sick. I'd make sure, I'd be meticulous in the care of his body to make sure that I just didn't swing his arms around or his legs around. If I had to bathe him, whatever I had to do. And that's the same care given to a body that the Hever Kadisha provides during a tahara. That's the ritual washing of a body. It's got to be one of the most beautiful traditions that our people have. It really is. Many people don't even know what a tahara is, but thank God, because someone is connected to somebody who's found their way back to Judaism, more taharas are being done today than ever before. Because somebody has found their way back and says to their uncle, gee, is Aunt so-and-so having a tahara? What's that? Let me tell you. Or let me get someone to call you and tell you what it is. So when the funeral director says, and that's changing too, when the funeral director says, you don't want that, it's Orthodox. They know better. I'm not Orthodox, but believe me, I want that because it's not Orthodox. It's just Jewish. It's not Orthodox, it's not conservative, it's not Reform, it's just Jewish. And I want a Jewish burial. And anything short of a burial without a tahara may be kosher style, but it's not kosher. It's not Jewish. Did I answer any question at all? Okay, anybody? Yes.
We have kosher foods that
Right.
you can pick up and see that it's kosher. You can go to a kosher restaurant and know it's kosher. How is it that you can go to a funeral home that's known as a Jewish funeral home and it's not kosher?
Well, I
Why
guess.
are they not identified so it makes it easier for people who want a Jewish burial to know they'll get the tahara, they'll have everything the way it should be?
That's a great question. Now, there are few funeral homes like that that exist in the New York area. Very few elsewhere. There's a body that can kind of gets involved in this called the Jewish Funeral Directors of America. And in order to be part of that that body that certain benefits that the funeral homes get, the laws, the rules, regulations are very loose. We've been trying very hard now to pass a ruling that any Jewish funeral home that wants to be part of the Jewish Funeral Directors of America does exactly what you're saying. They stop offering cremations. Before that's going to happen, though, there will be brochures that will be put in the lobbies of these Jewish funeral homes that will talk in a very non-threatening way about the benefits of a ground burial versus cremation. Rabbi Lyons will explain those brochures, very well put together. That's a starting point. Now, I've been approached on numerous times to put together a kosher funeral home. Here's the problem. The problem is, all the people that will go to that funeral home, they know they want a tahara, they want a traditional burial. But what about the hundreds and hundreds of Yidden that want a Jewish burial, but don't know what it is, that won't have that opportunity any longer if they go to the other funeral homes, because the other funeral homes will say, gee, you've got funeral homes that offer that. We don't care. We're going to do what we have to do to make money. And they won't have an opportunity to speak to anybody there that can talk them out of it. As a matter of fact, Rabbi Zone has talked me out of opening up such a funeral home here because of the hundreds of Yidden that won't be given a kosher burial. But it's a great question.
Hundreds are not getting kosher burial. They don't even know what they're getting. And just like Jews who want to keep kosher, it's been provided to them. They know where they can get kosher meat. They know where they can get kosher products.
Yeah, but the person who knows where to buy kosher goes out and buys kosher.
They can buy it anywhere.
Right, but a person who knows that they want a kosher burial, they can get that as long as they know they want a kosher burial. Same thing, person goes to a Reform synagogue, you know, it's not kosher. I mean, they serve food that's not kosher, and I don't want to get into this whole thing about, I'm not here to bash any segment of Judaism. I'm just saying, so those people who are still going to go to the other funeral home, they're not going to go to the traditional Jewish funeral home. They're going to go to the other funeral home.
Wait a minute, what if the burial was subsidized? You have Moskowitz, you have a lot of people with big money, and it's all price sensitive, as you just pointed out. What if that funeral home had a, we'll give you a Jewish burial, and guess what? It's 50% of the 13,000 or whatever.
Well,
I think you could have a marketing thing on that basis. Yeah.
That's true. That's true, but
I mean, there are people out there with very deep pockets who want to help the Jewish people.
and those people are, thank God, are currently involved to some degree. And Jewish Federation, for example, has always had an indigent burial program. They've completely run out of money. But 25 years ago, we passed a ruling with the Jewish Federation that when a family comes in and does not have money for a burial, they can't pick and choose what they want. They have to have a kosher burial. They can't.
And they were okay with that, the Federation.
Federation, yeah, they had no choice. They really wanted that too. This way, you can't have a family say, you know, I want this and not that. I want this. There's no picking and choosing. The whole idea of the Jewish approach to burial is equality. Some people are born in this world. We're all born equal. Some of us achieved great wealth. Some of us have achieved minimal wealth. Some can afford fancy clothing. Others, torn clothing. And the tachrichim, the burial shrouds that are used, traditionally used, symbolize equality, simplicity, dignity. But we all leave this world equally. There are no pockets in our tachrichim. We can't take with us anything except for the good deeds, the mitzvahs that we've done in this world to the next world. But it's complicated what you're saying, and I appreciate. I think we have a great chance now of making a difference, though, in the existing funeral homes, at least, to get them to stop offering cremations. And most of those funeral homes, when a family doesn't have money, they're willing to listen, they're willing to do something. I know the funeral homes that I'm connected with are willing to help out families.
Are they willing to educate the person coming in the door that, is it you really should be buried and not cremated?
More now than ever before, and it's getting even better.
That's good.
It's getting, with these brochures, these non-threatening brochures, yet very powerful. Yes,
What about like the umbrella reform and conservative organization? That, you know, I mean, what have you experienced in like trying to reach out to them so that if somebody goes to a reform rabbi and the reform rabbi says, look, you've got to do it the Jewish way. What results have we got from reaching out to them?
better now than ever before, and the key to that is the Federation again. Because the Federation somehow or another is able to put together boards of rabbis that consist across the board, and of all. And it's getting more positive reception now than ever before. The problem, a big problem is that you may have 30 rabbis that say no to cremation. So the 3 that say yes are now cleaning up. They're all making the big money. They look at it as opportunities to make more money. So we really have to try our best to get the funeral homes to stop offering it as a service. Now what about, and these are things that the funeral homes fear. Believe me, funeral homes get a bad rap, but they do a lot of good too. A lot of good too. They give a lot of tzedakah, a lot of charity. What about a family that has cremated their loved one, and now the Jewish funeral home has stopped offering cremation? And a year later, they come in and they said, gee, you cremated my mother. Why didn't you tell me any of this a year ago? They're in a tough situation. But, as I tell a child who's talking to his siblings, you didn't know a year ago that it was not proper. You didn't know 5 years ago. Now you do. Well, unfortunately, the funeral homes can't always use that either, because they know that it's not. But most of them, there's not that strong connection to Yiddishkeit anyways, to Judaism anyway, so
But what about, I'm sorry.
it's okay.
What about the other alternative? Are Jews considering above ground burials? Because that is an alternative.
Major problem. Major problem. And 90% of mausoleum entombment requires embalming, which is a removal of blood, substituting with a formaldehyde solution, which is really forbidden, and then placed into a metal casket, also forbidden. So above ground, and I gotta tell you, that's even a bigger lie than cremations. The whole sales approach to mausoleum crypts is, it's disgusting. In the last 3 years, I've been involved probably in about 25 disentombments from families where children are coming back to Judaism and they said, we entombed my father in a mausoleum, we now want my mother and father. We've done numerous doubles. We've taken them out of the mausoleum crypts and given them a proper ground burial. And I gotta tell you, I am the walking, talking mouthpiece against mausoleum crypts. If families only knew the truth, they only knew how disgusting, I don't want to get anybody sick, but the decomposition is, and how unnatural the decomposition is. For a body in a mausoleum crypt, they would say, don't you ever do that. But they're sold a bill of goods like, oh, it's really nice, it's sweet, it's above ground, they don't have to go in the ground. A lot of people are afraid of the bugs they're going to eat. They're afraid of these things. And they choose above ground entombment. When you see a body that's come out of a metal casket and we put it into a wooden casket and you see the unnatural type of decomposition that occurs, don't forget, the body will give off gases. These gases were in the ground It's involved in the earth is involved in, believe it or not, it's a clean decomposition. That's what it's all about, from dust to dust. When a person is pent up in a metal container, those gases will eat the body up from within. It's the most horrific sight you can possibly see. Next. Anybody?
About the, you know, the saying about if you get tattoos, you have a proper Jewish burial, what's that all about?
Well, because we don't hold a person to accountability for basically his soul being stolen or kidnapped and fed a bill of goods that they weren't in their right mind. Nobody with a tattoo is nowadays is kept out of a Jewish cemetery. Nobody.
Could you, do you provide a list of funeral homes that will do a Jewish burial and cemeteries that adhere to a Jewish law?
Well, all of the funeral homes will, if you know what you're looking for, will provide a kosher burial. And the cemeteries too. There's only one Jewish cemetery in South Florida that does not have mausoleum crypts and that does not allow cremains to go into the ground. That's Mount Sinai Cemetery in Opelika, Florida, right next to North Miami Beach, off of I-95 at 135th Street. But it's not convenient for everybody.
There's none in this area.
No, none of them. You can have it get a Jewish burial, but they all offer mausoleum crypts. Some of them don't allow cremains to be buried, but some of them now are relaxing even those laws and allowing cremains to be buried. But there's even those that are allowing that to be done now, if it means a Jewish burial as a result of allowing the cremains to be buried. Yes, sorry. Go ahead.
So the 40% that you mentioned
Yeah.
that are being cremated, if you had to put it into percentage, how much of that would you say is a financial thing, as you just mentioned, as opposed to just the adamant, like the granddaughter situation
Half.
you just talked about?
Half,
Half and half?
half, yeah, half. It's a combination though, of the financial as well as the, you know, it's the easiest thing for me to do. I don't have to worry about it financially, blah, blah, blah. And instead of asking for help, instead of just saying, all right, that's what I'll do. So a lot of it is.
But almost 50% of it has nothing to do with money. is what you're saying.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, besides the effect that it has on the actual body and soul of the person who's being cremated,
Right.
what is the effect that it has on the people, you know, who, you know, the community as a whole? Because you talked about what a, you know, the state it is on the community, or what a tragedy is for the community, but what is the, you know, implications for the people who are living and not the person who's actually being cremated?
Everybody deals with death in a different way. I think the Jewish approach, and it really goes hand in hand with even modern psychological thinking, and that is, it's the opposite of denial. I'm sure people have been to a cemetery when the casket is waving on the lowering device and everybody is out the gate before it's even lowered. That's not the Jewish approach. The Jewish approach, and I have told this to many families, there are three reasons why we stay while the casket is being lowered and we fill the grave in ourselves. Number one, from a traditional standpoint, 6 million of our loved ones never were afforded a Jewish burial. So we have that privilege, that opportunity. Getting back to the modern, contemporary school of thought, as painful as it is to watch the casket being lowered, as painful as it is to hear that first thud of earth hit that casket, it is the beginning of a healthy bereavement process. because it is the opposite of denial. It is the opposite of denial. And the third, which goes a long way convincing families that they should stay, perhaps even more than the last two, is that just as mom wouldn't leave your bedside before she would tuck you into bed at night, we're not going to leave mom until we tuck her into God's bed. And that probably does more to convince a family to stay. And many, 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 many people who have never held a shovel in their hands now want to participate in this great mitzvah. So, but people handle things differently. There are families that will wake up a year later and say, well, what did I do? I had no proper bereavement. And now they're waking up to a loss. And it's really playing a number on their minds. But the most intricate and beautiful laws that are set out for our own benefit are the laws of mourning. They're so beautiful. And not only do they help the transition of the soul from this world to the next, but they help us tremendously in dealing with all of this. We've got to get to Rabbi Jay Lyons, who I have the privilege of working with to try to change all of this. And we got to get a lot of people involved. Anything you guys can do to raise the conscious level of Yidden out there will be so appreciated. You'll be doing yourselves, our people, tremendous mitzvah here. We have opportunities now to really get involved. Don't hold back. Let's get involved. Rabbi Jay Lyons, please.
Thank you. All right. All right, so my wife is a psychologist, so she's very into people expressing, real emotion, raw emotion, and whatnot, and it's really, it's odd to say enjoyable, but it's really enjoyable to hear Rabbi Kopelman speak, just because, not that I in any way enjoy your pain, but it's nice to see a real person really hurt, by the situation. Just to do a couple of housekeeping points over here, we'd like to thank Rabbi and Mrs. Adam Eisenberg for sponsoring this evening. I'd like to thank the JEC, the entire staff of the JEC for putting everything together and everything that built up to this, the previous lecture series and whatnot. If you enjoy the rest of the program, you can thank the JEC for convincing me to move to South Florida. If you don't, then you can get mad at Rabbi Fetter, he's in the back over there. Okay, so as far as sort of like the, well, let me put it like this. There's much of what we've been talking about up until now is based on a verse in Job, in Eov, where it says that the soul returns to its creator and the body returns to the earth. And from here we basically learned that, in the death process, where the two part ways, the body and soul, were partners up until that point, that there's a comfort for both of them in going back to where they came from. It's much of the in-ground burial and whatnot. And that's also the idea of, the Rabbi Kopelman mentioned a few times about the soul having affinity to the body and being comforted by the bodies being buried, which is why we don't do above-ground burial, which is why we don't do, embalming, cremation, etc., because it's the natural process of returning to the earth is really the best thing for the body and the best thing for the soul. And based on that, there's an organization called Peaceful Return, which is a sort of an offshoot of the National Association of Chaver Kedisha, where what we do is that we try to educate people about the concept of Jewish burial, and we also try to solve sort of big problems. So there were certain things that were mentioned over here. The gentleman over there mentioned the idea of, having get the money together and do a Jewish, funeral home and a Jewish cemetery, kosher, regular cemetery and nonprofit and whatnot, have at a reduced rate, and certain very big ideas like this we are working on. We're more than happy to have anybody's input, and but that is sort of the dream. The main thing is that, like Rabbi Kopelman said, the hardest situation to deal with is after the person's passed away, after they have arrangements made, and certainly after they have a spouse or a close, family member who already had, a cremation, and it's very difficult to deal with. However, when you're dealing with a live person who is interested in talking to you and who will hear what you have to say, it's not necessarily easy, but it's certainly a lot easier, than the former. So what we try to do is that we have a few different lectures that we do. One of them is called Bearing Our Souls, where basically the starting point is that we sort of talk about Judaism in the afterlife, many things that Rabbi Light mentioned in the three-part series. And then the sort of proof to everything that we're saying is Jewish burial traditions. So in other words, it's a way of people realizing the value of the Jewish burial traditions, in a very real way, because first we can't talk about all these concepts of the afterlife. This is available free of charge to anybody interested. If you have friends, family, there's no group too big or too small. If we need to, we'll go to what's the state of Miami? Taxpayer Stadium, what's it called? I'm just kidding. Anyways, Sun Life. They changed the name on me too much. Land Shark, whatever. Anyway, so if you want to have an intimate group of people in your living room, we're happy to do that. But the idea is basically we're trying to spread the word. We're trying to educate people. There's a very real problem in the sense that you have Jewish funeral homes that don't bother to educate people, that offer things that are traditionally not Jewish, and so therefore what we are trying to engage in is basically just the education process, where we make it exciting and have a few jokes here and there, which some of them I'm not going to share. Somebody reminded me of one. Oh, I have a great story. Who reminded me of this? Great story. When I was in Queens, I was part of the Cover Condition Queens, and if you know New York geography, there's something way out on Long Island called Sag Harbor. Now, Sag Harbor is the hoity-toity, place, and there was this non-Jewish funeral home in Sag Harbor. And this gentleman owned it, grew up in Sag Harbor. He grew up in that house, and he's telling us stories about how, it was a funeral home when he was growing up, and how his father used to do whatever, telling us all this great stuff. And he's like, oh, you want to see the tree that Billy Joel hit when he was drunk? No, okay. Anyway, so he's telling us this story about, so we find ourselves an hour and a half out of Queens, and we're doing a Tahara in a non-Jewish funeral home. And so the way that it came to be was that he's telling us the story. He says, so family tells me that they want that they're Jewish and they want a cremation. And I say, okay, but you're Jewish, so you should have a Tahara ceremony. So I called Rabbi Zon, and I told Rabbi Zon I have a Jewish mind, and they want a Tahara ceremony, and don't worry about a casket because they're going to do cremation. And Rabbi Zon Zon's the director of the Cover Condition in Queens, Rabbi Zon says that if there's going to be a cremation, there can be no Tahara. So I go back to the family and I said, listen, Rabbi Zon said if there's going to be cremation, there can be no Tahara, and you're Jewish, you need a Tahara. And they said, oh, okay, so we'll have a Tahara, we'll do an in-ground burial, and that's it. So that was there's the whole story. But really, there's sometimes where it's just education, right? So with him, where, he's like working one of these businesses where it's on a, who knows what type of profit margin because the house was paid for 50 years, before he was born, and he's a simple guy, and he's not in it for the money, so like, what does he care if he makes $1,000 or $10,000 or no money, whatever it is, right? And so he's like, people like that are more real, right? Talk about the real emotion, but also just so simple to him that you're Jewish, you need a Tahara. Now, of course, he didn't know anything about cremation or not cremation, because, right, it's just not in the Jewish funeral business. So he passed on the word, people heard it, that's it, yeah, terrific, right? So I'm not saying it's always that easy, but the idea, though, is that there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of miseducation, and so therefore what we're trying to do is we're trying to do the education piece. So if you look on the table outside, to your right, I believe, we have a few different brochures. The one which is sort of the FAQ brochure about cremation versus burial has my number on it. You can call me anytime. If there's a specific family who you want me to give a call to and talk to, I'm happy to do that. If you want to have a class in your home, or if you're, in your community or wherever, we'd love to spread the word. And like I said, it's a directive, and it's all about basically how Jewish burial is an expression of our faith. One other note that I wanted to do as far as housekeeping is, I completely forgot. Okay, it was not because of my own notes, it had to do with something that somebody said, but I will try to remember. But anyways, in conclusion, we do have some very big ideas. but the reality is that it's really all about, person-to-person contact. People can speak to their friends, speak to their family, we're happy to speak to anybody. And it's really a matter of that the best thing for the soul is is Jewish burial. And we'll have one time for an offensive joke. I have a great joke. I can get away with a joke.
Only if it's offensive.
What? Only if it's offensive. So, like it used to be that, like you could tell sort of like off-color politically incorrect jokes if you were part of that culture. Right? Now that's changed a little bit. I happen to think that's a better change. But being that my last name is Lyons, I can sort of tell an Irish joke and kind of get away with it. So the Irish joke, which I have nothing against Irish people, and I don't in any way joke that I'm about to tell. And for those of you who are just tuning in, I did not make up this joke, and there's actually a lesson that comes from this joke. And don't quote me on it, but the joke goes like this. The joke is, what's the difference between, stop me here, anyway, the joke is, what's the difference between an Irish funeral and an Irish wedding? One less drunk guy. Okay, so, but the reality is we learn from this joke, which is why I said it, okay, because of course, I love Irish people, is that we would say that in any funeral, the most sober, cognizant, aware person in the room is the one whose soul does not have to understand anything through the filtration of the physical world, and the soul is sort of, there's a body, but is freed from the physical bounds, and the soul is very, very aware of what's going on. I mean, more so, the soul is more aware of what's going on to the body when they departed from each other than all of us right now. Which means to say that the Jewish burial customs are so important because they affected the deceased, or God forbid to choose the opposite, to choose a cremation or whatnot, it affects the deceased and it hurts the deceased so much more so, than it would even a living person. Thank you all very much for coming. There's food in the back also, by the way, people. Food in the back, and there are refrigerators in the back, and everybody likes to have a few.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank everyone so much for coming out tonight. Thank you, Coleman, for making the long schlep in traffic to get here. Thank you, everybody, Jay Lyons, as well, for joining us. Enjoy the cookies. Have a wonderful night.